"Deliveries are around the back, old man," she snapped, mistaking me for the help in the $6 million fortress I had paid for. My daughter-in-law didn't just banish me from her party. She planned to banish me from society, conspiring to lock me away and drain my trust fund to cover her secret gambling debts. She thought I was a feeble, senile pushover. She was about to find out that for 40 years they didn't call me the gavel for my patients. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out, opened my laptop, and initiated a protocol that would turn their luxury life into a prison of their own making. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know there are still people who believe in consequences. Let me take you back to the moment the storm began. The November rain didn't wash the world clean. It just made the grime slicker, turning the asphalt into a black mirror that reflected a distorted, weeping sky. It was a cold rain, the kind that seeps into the mortar of buildings and the joints of old men. I sat in the driver's seat of my 1970 Buick GSX, the engine idling beneath me. It was a deep, throaty rumble, a 455 cubic inch heart that vibrated against my spine, resonating in a chest that felt increasingly hollow these days. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm. Piston, spark, combustion, exhaust. A perfect cycle. It was the only sound I trusted anymore. Machines don't lie. A piston doesn't smile at you while it siphons your fuel. A transmission doesn't pretend to love you while it grinds its gears into dust. If a machine fails, it's because of physics, friction, or neglect. It's honest. I wished my family was built like this engine. Cast iron and high-octane truth. Instead, they felt like cheap drywall painted over to look solid, but rotting from the studs out. I checked my watch. The crystal was scratched, but the movement was Swiss and precise. Fingered film. 2 days before Thanksgiving. Outside the windshield, the sky was pitch black, bruised with heavy purple clouds that looked like old hematomas. The wind buffeted the heavy steel frame of the Buick, but inside it was warm. Safe. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel. The leather was cool under my palms, worn smooth by decades of driving. I stared at the ignition key. All I had to do was turn it to the left, just a flick of the wrist, and the silence would rush in. I didn't want to turn the engine off. If I turned it off, the illusion of control vanished. If I turned it off, I had to go inside. I looked up through the rain-streaked glass at the house. It wasn't a home. It was a monstrosity of modern architecture jutting out of the landscape like a jagged bone. Glass, steel, and sharp, aggressive angles that looked like they could cut you if you brushed against them. It had no eaves, no warmth, no shelter. It was a glass box designed for people who wanted to be watched, not for people who wanted to live. It looked like a weapon that had fallen from the sky and buried itself in the earth. I had paid for the land. I had paid for the reinforced concrete foundation. I had signed the checks for the roof that currently kept my son David and his wife Megan dry. But a roof doesn't make a shelter, and a house doesn't make a family. I built the structure, but the interior is crumbling. My name is Walter Sterling. For 40 years, I sat on the federal bench. In the newspapers, they called me the gavel. In the corridors of the courthouse, they whispered other names. Harder names. I sent senators to federal prison for selling their votes. I broke up cartels that treated human life like inventory. I looked into the dead, shark-like eyes of men who had dissolved bodies in acid, and I didn't blink. I learned the physics of the human soul early on. I learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the dangerous one. Noise is a distraction. The dangerous man is the one who sits quietly, the one who observes, the one who waits for the hairline fracture to appear in the testimony. I know exactly where the structural weakness lies, and I know how to apply the pressure to bring the whole thing down. I reached for the bottle on the passenger seat, wrapped in brown paper. Vintage Pinot Noir. T98. $400. It was absurd to spend that much on fermented grapes. But it was a peace offering, a toll to cross the bridge into their world. I hoped it would be enough to span the silence that had grown between David and me since Eleanor died. Who am I kidding? I knew it was just expensive vinegar to them. They wouldn't taste the year or the soil. They would only taste the price tag. I killed the engine. The silence was sudden and absolute. I stepped into the rain. The cold wind hit my face like a wet slap, stinging my eye. I pulled the collar of my trench coat tighter, burying my chin against the chill. I walked up the stone path. The slate was slippery, treacherous. The lights of the house were blazing. Every room was illuminated, broadcasting their existence to the dark neighborhood. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see shadows moving frantically. It looked like a showroom, a display case, not a place where people rested. I reached the massive front door, brushed steel and frosted glass. I raised my hand to knock, but I never got the chance. The door flew open. It wasn't David. It was a young woman in a crisp white vest and black slacks. She was holding a silver tray piled high with empty champagne flutes. She looked exhausted, strands of hair escaping her bun. Her name tag read Sarah. She was a new face. The catering staff changed every month here. Stability was not a currency. Megan traded in. She looked at me, an old man in a wet trench coat, holding a paper bag, and her expression shifted to annoyance. "Deliveries are around the back, old man," she said, her voice sharp with the stress of the kitchen. "Service entrance is past the garage." I stopped. I didn't speak immediately. I just looked at her. I put my boot in the door jamb before she could close it. It was a heavy, steel-toed work boot, a relic from my days inspecting construction sites before law school. The door hit the leather with a dull thud. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my hand. I just let my eyes do the work. I summoned the look I used to give perjury suspects right before I held them in contempt. It was a look that stripped away pretense. "I'm the father," I said. My voice sounded like grinding gravel, low, rough, and tired. Sarah flinched as if I'd struck her. She stepped back, the crystal glasses rattling on the tray. The color drained from her cheeks. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know. You didn't look like—" She trailed off, realizing she was digging the hole deeper. She lowered her voice, leaning in conspiratorially, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder. "Be careful, sir," she whispered. "The mood in there, that's not festive. It's a war zone." Her eyes were darting around. She wasn't just warning me about a bad mood. She was hiding fear. The structural integrity of this evening was already compromised. I pushed past her. The foyer was warm, oppressively warm. It smelled of expensive lilies, a funeral smell, and something else. The metallic tang of desperation. I heard the voice before I saw her. Megan, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was high, sharp, and jagged. It sounded like a saw blade hitting a nail in the wood. "No! Higher! You're incompetent!" she screamed. I walked into the living room. The space was vast, echoing and cold despite the temperature. Megan was standing in the center of the room, pointing a manicured finger at the far wall. 3 men in coveralls were struggling on ladders to hang a massive, ugly painting. It was an abstract piece, violent slashes of crimson and black tape. It looked like someone had thrown a bucket of blood at a canvas in a fit of rage. "It needs to dominate the room," Megan shouted, her hands trembling. "It cost $20,000. I want it to look like it. If it's an inch too low, I'm not paying for the installation." She turned, sensing a presence. She saw me. For a second, I looked for warmth. I looked for the girl David had married 5 years ago. But her face didn't soften. It tightened. The skin around her eyes pinched, and her jaw set. It was the look of a trap snapping shut. "Walter," she said. "No dad. No hello. No happy Thanksgiving. Just my name, dropped like a heavy stone into a deep well. You're early. The stylist hasn't even finished my hair." She scanned me, her gaze lingering on my wet trench coat with undisguised disgust. "And you're dripping rainwater on my Italian marble." "Hello, Megan," I said. I refused to apologize for the weather. I walked to a glass side table and set the bottle of wine down. Clink. The sound was sharp in the cavernous room. "Where is David?" She rolled her eyes, a dramatic, theatrical gesture meant for an invisible audience, as she snatched a glass of champagne from a passing tray without looking at the server. "He's in the study, dealing with the bank. Again." She took a gulp of the wine, not savoring it, just using it as fuel. She sighed, loud and long. "Go talk to him, and try not to depress him, Walter. We have the mayor coming for cocktails at 7. "The mayor?" I asked. "Yes." "The mayor," she snapped, adjusting a diamond bracelet that cost more than my first car. "I need David in a good mood. We are building a brand here, Walter. Connections. Perception. Not that you would understand. sitting in that dusty old house of yours." She turned her back on me, clapping her hands at the workmen. "Hire," I said, "hire." She didn't want a family. She wanted an audience. She was building a stage set, and David was just a prop. She moved around to catch the light. But props wear out, and stages collapse. I turned away from Megan's screeching and walked down the long gallery-style hallway. The floor was polished concrete, cold and industrial. The walls were lined with enormous gallery-wrapped canvases, photos of David and Megan. There they were in Paris, clinking glasses under the Eiffel Tower. In Milan, wearing designer sunglasses. In Tokyo, eating gold-leaf sushi, smiling, drinking, spending. I stopped at a photo of them on a yacht in the Mediterranean. They looked like strangers to me. The retouching was so heavy, their skin looked like plastic. There were no photos of David's mother, Eleanor. No photos of his childhood. No photos of the day he graduated law school, sweaty and proud in a rented gown. Just them, consuming the world. It was a museum of narcissism, a shrine to a life that existed only to be photographed. You can erase the past from the walls, David, but you can't erase the foundation, and right now the foundation is cracking. I reached the study door at the end of the hall. It was a heavy, solid oak door, one of the few real things in this house. I paused, my hand hovering over the brass handle. Inside, I could hear muttering, a low, panicked voice. It sounded like a prayer, or a plea. I took a breath, steeling myself. I wasn't just a father entering a room. I was an inspector entering a condemned building. I turned the handle and pushed. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of 3 computer monitors and a green banker's lamp. I had given him when he passed the bar. David was sitting at his desk, buried under piles of paper. He didn't look up immediately. His head was in his hands, fingers digging into his scalp, as if trying to hold his skull together. He looked 10 years older than his 35 years. His hair was thinning at the crown. His shoulders were slumped forward, collapsing under an invisible weight. The air in the room was stale, old coffee and the sharp, sour scent of fear. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner to test the rope. "David," I said softly. He jumped violently. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as he scrambled back. Papers fluttered to the ground. "Dad, Todd. Jesus, you scared me." He stood up, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He tried to smile, but it was a grimace. The muscles in his face twitched. I didn't hear you come in. Is it 5 already? You look like you're under indictment, son," I said, ignoring his question. I walked over, stepping over a crumpled bank statement on the floor. I sat in the leather wingback chair opposite him. "Sit down, David." It wasn't a request. It was a directive from the bench. He sat, sinking low in his chair. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked at the door, checking if it was fully closed. Then he looked at the window. Anywhere but at me. Finally, he met my gaze. His eyes were rimmed with red, bloodshot and frantic. "It's cash flow," he whispered. "Just a temporary liquidity issue." "Again?" I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of sympathy. I had heard this opening statement before. "I gave you a bridge loan last year, David. $50,000. That was supposed to clear the credit cards and stabilize the firm. Where did it go?" David winced. He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy, lying about broken windows. "It's gone," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Market research. Branding. Megan wants to expand. She's launching a lifestyle brand. Viver. We need capital to seed the inventory." "Inventory? Inventory?" I scoffed. "You're an architect, David. You design structures. You don't peddle what? Perfume? Scarves? It's a platform, Dad. You don't understand the modern economy," he argued weakly. "But the overhead, it ate the 50,000 in 2 months. The bank is being difficult about the second mortgage," he continued, rushing the words. "Because you haven't paid off the first one, Aiden." I looked around the room. The expensive ergonomic chair. The top-of-the-line computers. "David, this house is a sinkhole. It is a vampire. You cannot afford this life. You are bleeding out." I know, he pleaded, leaning over the desk. I know, okay? I can't sleep. I can't eat. He lowered his voice to a desperate hiss. But this is different. This is the big one. If we can just float the overhead for 3 more months, the brand will launch. The pre-orders will come in. We just need access. I went cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I sat very still. My hands rested on the arms of the chair, perfectly steady. Access to what? David looked down at his shoes, Italian leather, likely unpaid for. He swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob. The trust, he whispered. The principle. My heart stopped. Then it hardened. That money wasn't just currency. It was Eleanor's sacrifice. It was 20 years of her clipping coupons, her teaching summer school, her denying herself luxuries so that our son would be safe when we were gone. It was her ghost. David, I said. My voice was low, dangerous. It was the voice I used when sentencing a man to life without parole. That money was your mother's life savings. It is locked until you are 50. It is for your retirement. It is to ensure you do not starve when you are old. I leaned forward. It is not for parties. It is not for lifestyle brands. It is sacred. We need it now. The voice came from the doorway.
I didn't turn around. I knew who it was.
Megan stood there. She had followed me. She was holding her champagne glass like a weapon, gripping the stem so hard I thought it might snap. She looked like a predator sensing blood in the water. She stepped into the room. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor with military precision. Click, 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 like a ticking bomb counting down. She walked past me and stood behind David, placing a hand on his shoulder. It looked less like comfort and more like she was holding him in place. We need you to sign a waiver, Walter, she said, her voice icy and commanding. The lawyers have already drafted it. It breaks the age clause. You just need to sign as trustee. Release the funds. Tonight, absolutely not, I said. I stood up. I was 6'2". Even at 70, I towered over her. I let my shadow fall over her, engulfing her manicured perfection in darkness. You are bleeding money, Megan? I've seen the credit card statements you leave on the counter. You aren't investing. You're gambling. You're trying to fill a hole in your soul with things. Her eyes widened. The mask of the polite socialite shattered completely. How dare you, she hissed. We are building a legacy, something a dusty old bureaucrat like you wouldn't understand. She took a step closer, invading my space. She smelled of alcohol and aggression. You sit in your rotting house with your memories. You're obsolete, Walter. You're a relic. We are the future. The future requires solvency, I said calmly. I will not fund this. I will not let you burn Eleanor's memory to keep your vanity warm. Megan's face turned a violent shade of crimson. A vein throbbed in her temple. Underneath the Botox and the makeup there was something ugly. Something raw, greedy, and terrified. You selfish, hoarding old parasite. She spat. Saliva flew from her mouth, landing on my lapel. You'd rather see us fail than let go of your precious control. You hate that I'm spending Eleanor's money, don't you? You hate that she's dead and we're alive. I hate that you are wasting what she died to save, I said. I looked at David. He was shrinking into his chair, covering his ears like a child. David, I said, speak up, get out. Megan screamed. She threw her champagne glass. It flew past my ear, missing me by inches. It smashed against the bookshelf behind me. Crash! Shards of expensive crystal rained down on the carpet. Champagne dripped down the spines of David's law books, books he hadn't opened in years. Megan! David cried out. He stood up, reaching for her arm. Shut up, David. She spun on him, slapping his hand away. He's choking us. He's the reason we're failing. He wants us to be small like him. He wants you to be a nobody. She turned back to me. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were wide and wild, the pupils dilated. Get out of my house. And listen to me. Don't show your face at our Thanksgiving table, you old fool. She pointed at the door, her finger trembling. We don't want you. We don't need you. Go home and die alone with your money. The room rang with the echo of her scream. Silence followed. A heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums. I looked at David. I waited for the man I raised to find his voice. I waited for the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man I taught to tie a tie. I waited for him to defend his father. David looked at me. Tears filled his eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. Then he looked at Megan. He saw her rage. He saw the sheer force of her will. He saw the woman who controlled his life, his image, his validation. He looked down at the floor. He couldn't meet my gaze. He collapsed inward, a building finally giving way to gravity. "Please, Dad," he whispered. His voice was broken. "Just go, please, before it gets worse." The silence cut deeper than the glass. It wasn't the anger that broke me. It was the cowardice. My son was gone. My heart didn't break. It calcified. It turned into something hard, cold, and impenetrable, like the engine block of my Buick. I looked at Megan. She was panting, triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had banished the old man. She didn't know she had just banished her only shield. She didn't realize she had just kicked away the only pillar holding up her roof. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I smoothed my raincoat. I looked at them both with a clinical detachment. The verdict was in. I smirked. It was a small, razor-thin smile. The smile of a judge who knows something the defense does not. "As you wish," I said softly. I buttoned my raincoat. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the study, leaving the door open. I walked down the hall of smiling photos, ignoring the lies on the walls. I walked past Sarah in the foyer, who was staring wide-eyed. I walked out the front door into the storm. I got into my Buick. I started the engine. The 4055 rumbled to life, shaking the frame. A comforting, violent vibration. I didn't look back at the house of glass. I put the car in gear and drove away. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth. Slash, slash, cutting the ties. But the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I wasn't driving home. I was initiating the protocol. I drove through the rain, the Buick's wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The city was a blur of neon smeared across wet glass, red taillights, amber street lamps, the harsh white of oncoming traffic. I didn't go home to my empty house. I couldn't bear the silence there. Not tonight. The silence at home was a void. I needed a different kind of silence. The silence of authority. I steered the car downtown, navigating the slick streets by muscle memory. I headed toward the federal building. It was a brutalist structure of concrete and rebar, built in the 70s. Ugly, impenetrable, and absolutely solid. It didn't care about aesthetics. It cared about standing up. Just like me, I parked in the underground garage, my tires squealing on the painted concrete. I still held emeritus status, a privilege of the bench. I kept a private office on the 14th floor, a place where I could review cases for the appellate court, or simply think. I took the elevator up to the lobby. The building was locked down for the holiday weekend. It was a tomb of marble and security glass. I walked past the night desk. The air conditioning hummed, a low, constant drone. George, the night security guard, looked up from his bank of monitors. He was a new fixture in my life, but a familiar archetype. An old Marine, high and tight haircut, uniform pressed sharp enough to cut skin. "Judge Sterling," he nodded, standing up out of respect. "Working late, Your Honor." "Something like that, George," I said, signing the logbook. My hand was steady. "Bad weather for it," he muttered, glancing at the rain lashing the glass doors. "The storm is inside, George," I said, handing him the pen. "Not out here." I took the private elevator to the 14th floor. The hallway was dark, lit only by the red exit sign. I walked to the end of the hall, to the door with the frosted glass pane. Walter Sterling, Senior District Judge. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The office smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and mahogany. It was a masculine scent, a smell of order and consequence. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I walked to the desk and switched on the small brass reading lamp. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled below, indifferent and cold. Millions of people, millions of lies. I sat in my leather chair. It creaked, welcoming me back. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark office, illuminating the deep lines in my face. I wasn't just a father tonight. I wasn't a rejected old man. I was the trustee. I was the structural engineer of the family fortune, and I had just found a critical failure in the load-bearing walls. I opened the trust document. Article 14, Section B, the Competency Clause. I read the words I had written 20 years ago. If the beneficiaries demonstrate a pattern of fiscal recklessness that endangers the principal, or if their actions suggest a compromise in judgment, the trustee reserves the sole right to suspend all support immediately. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was like a gavel striking the sound block. It was time to work. Step 1, the freeze. I logged into the family banking portal. I had administrative access, a condition David had agreed to when I gave him the down payment for the house. I pulled up the accounts, my breath caught in my throat. I expected them to be low. I didn't expect them to be desolate. Joint checking $412. Savings $0. Emergency fund $0. I scrolled through the transaction history. It was a litany of waste. Balenciaga, Ritz-Carlton, Tesla leasing, private jet charter. They had burned through $300,000 in 6 months. It wasn't just spending, it was arson. I navigated to the administrative controls. My finger hovered over the mouse. This is the nuclear option. Once I press this, there is no going back. I am cutting the oxygen line. I thought of Megan screaming at me. I thought of David looking at the floor. I clicked the button. Status frozen. Transfers blocked. I moved to the credit lines. Megan's American Express Platinum. Limit $100,000. Balance $98,450. Megan's Visa Black. Limit $50,000. David's corporate card. Suspended. I typed in the override code. Terminate account. Reason, trustee intervention. Action, immediate revocation. I watched the status lights on the screen turn from green to red. The bleeding stops now. If the patient dies from the shock, so be it. But I will not let the infection spread. Step 2. The recall. It picked up the secure landline on my desk. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Tony Valenti. He owned the luxury leasing agency that David used. Tony was a man who understood contracts better than most lawyers. He picked up on the second ring. Valenti Luxury Imports, he answered, his voice thick with a cigar. Tony, it's Walter Sterling. Walter, Judge? His tone shifted instantly. It's late. Is everything all right? No, Tony, it isn't. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the rain hitting the window. I am withdrawing my personal guarantee on David's Porsche 911 and Megan's Range Rover. Tonight, Walter, Tony hesitated. You co-signed those leases. If you pull the guarantee, they are in default. I know the contract, Tony. Clause 7A. Withdrawal is 7A. Withdrawal of guarantor. Yeah, but Walter, it's Thanksgiving week, Tony said, his voice lowering. If I process this, the system flags it automatically. The repo order goes out to the contractors immediately. They work holidays. They get double rates. They are in breach, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They haven't made a payment in 3 months? Have they? Silence on the line. No, Tony admitted. They're 90 days past due. I've been holding off the repo guys as a favor to you. Do me a different favor, I said. Let them do their jobs. Okay, Judge. It's your call. The trucks will roll in an hour. I hung up the phone. I felt no guilt. Guilt is for those who are unsure of their verdict. I had seen the evidence. They wanted the lifestyle of the rich. Fine. Let them experience the consequences of the insolvent. They were flying high on a trapeze, convinced gravity didn't apply to them because I was holding the net. I had just cut the net. Step 3. The lights. I logged into the utility provider's portal. The massive glass house consumed electricity like a small factory. The heating, the mood lighting, the heated floors. The account was in my name, another temporary measure from 5 years ago that had become permanent. I stared at the bill, $2,000 a month. I clicked the service tab. Request terminate service. Reason: move out vacation of property. Effective date: immediately. I confirmed the request. The smart meter would receive the signal within the hour. The heated floors would go cold. The lights would die. The security system would switch to backup battery, then fail. I sat back, interlacing my fingers. In 20 minutes I had stripped them of every luxury they felt entitled to. I had turned their glass palace into a cold, dark cage. But I wasn't done. There was a variable I couldn't account for. The aggression. Megan was spoiled, yes. But tonight she had been frantic, primal. Why the desperation? Why the demand for the trust in... My personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. I stared at it. It wasn't David. It wasn't Megan. It was Arthur, my personal attorney and oldest friend. I picked it up. Arthur? Walter? Arthur's voice was shaky. He sounded out of breath, like he had been pacing. I'm glad you answered. I didn't know if I should call, but I have to tell you something. What is it, Arthur? Megan, she came to my office yesterday, without David. And she brought a doctor with her, Walter. A man named Dr. Thorne, I frowned. Who is Dr. Thorne? He's a psychiatrist, Arthur said. Or he claims to be. He's a hired gun for probate disputes. Arthur paused. I could hear him pouring a drink in the background. Megan wanted him to review your medical history. She wanted him to testify that you were mentally incompetent. Senile, dementia, nembrunche. My grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. She wanted to take the trust, Arthur whispered. By force. She had the papers drawn up, Walter, power of attorney, conservatorship. She was going to have you committed. The room spun. The floor seemed to tilt. It wasn't just greed. It was a coup. She didn't just have the money. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to lock me away in a home, drugged and drooling, so she could strip the carcass of my estate. She had looked me in the eye tonight and called me an old fool, knowing she had the knife behind her back. The betrayal wasn't emotional. It was tactical. Thank you, Arthur. I said. My voice was ice. Absolute zero. That's all I needed to know. Walter, what are you going to do? Arthur asked, panic rising in his voice. I'm going to let nature take its course, I said. I hung up. The war had changed. This wasn't a lesson anymore. This was survival. I needed to vanish. If I stayed in town, they would come to my door. Not just David and Megan, but their lawyers. The police, maybe. If she tried to push the senile narrative, I couldn't risk a confrontation where I might lose my temper. I needed distance. I opened my desk drawer. I took out a prepaid burner phone, a habit from the old days of handling sensitive RICO cases where wiretaps were common. I left my main smartphone on the mahogany desk. Let them track that. Let them ring an empty room. I packed a small bag I kept in the closet, a change of clothes, a flashlight, a map. I walked out of the office, locking the door behind me. I took the stairs down 14 flights. Avoiding the cameras in the elevator, I got into the Buick. The engine roared to life, eager. I didn't turn toward my house. I turned north. I had a hunting cabin in the Catskills. It was miles from the nearest paved road, off the grid. No internet, no landline, just a fireplace, a generator, and the silence of the woods. It was a place I went to think. A place I went to remember who I was before the world got complicated. I was vanishing. Let them scream into the void. Let them face the darkness I had just sent to them. I drove into the night, the red taillights of the city fading in my rearview mirror like dying embers. Thanksgiving Eve. The cabin was exactly as I had left it 6 months ago. Cold, silent, smelling of cedar, wood smoke, and dust. It was a rough-hewn structure of timber and stone, built in the 1920s. It had no insulation to speak of, just thick logs that held the cold at bay through sheer mass. I had built a fire in the stone hearth. The crackling of the dry oak was the only conversation in the room. I sat at the heavy pine table, my laptop open, connected to a satellite uplink I used for emergency court filings. The connection was slow, the signal bouncing off a satellite somewhere in the freezing void of space. I wasn't looking at case files. I was watching the demolition of my son's life in real time. A notification popped up in the corner of my screen. Alert, transaction declined. Merchant, le salon débuté. Amount $450. Card Amex Platinum ending in 492. I closed my eyes. I could visualize the scene perfectly. Megan, sitting in the stylist chair, the cape around her neck, her hair half done. She would be handing the card over with that dismissive flick of her wrist. The pause, the second attempt, the whispered apology from the receptionist. Then another alert. Alert, transaction declined. Merchant, Starbucks and 402. Amount 1850s. She was trying small purchases now. Testing the perimeter of the cage. I took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter. Panic is setting in. She's standing at a counter, people waiting behind her, realizing that the plastic rectangle in her hand is just a piece of plastic. The magic is gone. 11:00 a.m. I switched tabs to the security camera feed of the house. I'd installed the system years ago after a string of break-ins in their neighborhood. They never changed the master password. They probably didn't even know how. The feed was high definition, slick with rain. A massive flatbed truck was backing into the driveway. It wasn't a discreet tow. It was a heavy-duty repossession unit. The backup beeper cut through the audio feed. Beep, beep, beep. The front door of the house flew open. Megan ran out. She wasn't wearing a coat. She was in a silk robe and slippers, splashing into the puddles. I zoomed in. Her face was distorted, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear over the truck's engine. She hammered her fists on the driver's door. The driver, a large man in a yellow slicker, stepped out. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. He handed her a slip of paper, the repossession order. Megan ripped it into confetti and threw it in his face. She pointed a finger at the house, then at the sky. Lip reading, my husband is an architect. You can't take this. Do you know who we are? The driver ignored her. He didn't care who they were. He only cared that the check hadn't cleared. He hooked the Range Rover. The winch whined. The car, her black, glossy armor against the world, was dragged up the ramp like a dead beast. Megan stood in the driveway, barefoot in the freezing rain, watching her status symbol disappear down the street. She looked small. Defeat consequences are a heavy thing to carry when you've never lifted a weight in your life. 2:30 p.m. The screen flickered. The house went dark. The interior cameras switched automatically to night vision mode. The feed turned grainy and green, giving the rooms a ghostly, underwater quality. I saw movement in the living room. David was pacing. Back and forth, back and forth. He was holding his smartphone, shaking it violently. I unmuted the audio feed. Answering. The phone just rings. The bank says the accounts are locked by the trustee. By him. He can't do this. Megan's voice shrieked from the shadows. She was striking a match, trying to light a decorative candle. Her hands were shaking so hard the flame danced. He's senile. We'll sue him. We'll get Dr. Thorne to certify him. With what money, Megan? David yelled back, his voice cracking. He threw his phone onto the plush sofa. It bounced harmlessly. We have $0. The cards are dead. The cars are gone. The power is out. He slumped onto the couch, putting his head in his hands. It's over. He knows. He knows everything. He doesn't know about the other thing, Megan whispered. He will, David groaned. I sat back in the cabin, the firelight dancing on the log walls. Happy Thanksgiving, I whispered to the screen. I thought the lesson was complete. I thought I had broken them enough to rebuild them. But then the story took a turn I hadn't engineered. My burner phone rang. The sound was jarring in the silence of the cabin. A harsh digital trill. I stared at it. 3 people on Earth had this number. My cardiologist, my attorney, Arthur, and Frank Miller, chief of the FBI's Organized Crime Division. We had worked together for 30 years. I signed his warrants. He brought me the bad guys. He was the only man I trusted with my life. I picked up the phone. Frank, Walter. Frank's voice was tight. Urgent. There was no pleasantry, no holiday greeting. Where are you? I'm up north, I said, guarding my location out of habit. Taking a break. Why? Are you at the cabin? I hesitated. Yes. Stay there. Don't move, but listen to me carefully. I got a flag on a name you asked me to watch years ago, Frank said. Megan Clark? Your daughter-in-law. My stomach dropped. The cold feeling in my gut wasn't from the drafty window. What about her? We have a wire up on the Russo family. Tony the Aunt Russo's crew. We picked up chatter this morning. Frank paused, the static of the line filling the silence. They mentioned her name, Walter, and they mentioned the debt. I stood up, knocking my chair back. What debt? I just froze her credit cards. She owes Visa and Amex. No, Walter, Frank said grimly. She owes the street. She's been gambling. High-stakes underground poker in the city. She's in the hole.
How much? I demanded.
200,000, Frank said. And the VIG is running at 10% a week. I closed my eyes. The pieces clicked together. The desperation. The demand for the trust money tonight. The panic when I walked out. She wasn't trying to expand a business. She was trying to buy her life. Walter, Frank continued, his voice dropping an octave. The deadline is tomorrow, Thanksgiving. They were on the wire. They said if she doesn't pay by sundown, they're going to, the exact quote was, carve the turkey. God help us. This wasn't just greed. It was survival. Megan hadn't been spending the money on clothes to show off. She had been paying interest to sharks to keep them from breaking her legs. She was drowning, and she had dragged David into the deep end with her. They're going to come for her, I said. If she can't pay, they will, Frank confirmed. We have a team getting ready to pick her up, but we lost eyes on them. The power cut at your son's house messed with our surveillance. They aren't at the house, I said, looking at the green screen. The living room was empty. They left 10 minutes ago. Where did they go, Walter? I looked out the window at the dense, dark forest. I remembered a day, 25 years ago. David was 10. I had brought him here to teach him to shoot a rifle. I taught him that this place was safe, that this was where we went when the world got too loud. If she gets desperate, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it, she's going to lead them to the only source of money she knows. Me. Does she know where the cabin is? Frank asked. No, but David does. Get out of there, Walter, Frank commanded. Right now, get in the car and drive to the local precinct. I can't, I said. Why not? Because if they are coming here, they are bringing the Russos with them. If I leave, David walks into an ambush alone. Walter, don't be a hero, Frank snapped. You're 70 years old. These are contract killers. I'm a judge, Frank. I preside. I walked over to the gun safe in the corner of the room. I spun the dial. Right 15. Left 22. Right 8. Send your team, Frank. But tell them to come in quiet. No sirens. I don't want a hostage situation. We're 2 hours out, Frank warned. The roads are icing over. The safe door swung open with a heavy click. Inside, the steel gleamed. I bypassed the shotguns. I reached for the top shelf. My 1911 Colt Government Model Punt 45. ACP. It was heavy, cold, and oiled. I racked the slide. Clack. I'll hold the court in session until you get here, I said. Walter, 2 hours, Frank. Don't be late. I hung up the phone. I looked at the fireplace. The flames were dying down. The peaceful retreat was over. The lesson was over. The war had come to me. I wasn't the bitter father anymore. I was the last line of defense. I spent the next hour preparing, not like a host, but like a siege engineer. I wasn't a soldier. I had avoided Vietnam due to a knee injury from football, but I was a hunter. I knew this cabin. I knew every loose board, every drafty corner, and exactly where the shadows fell deepest when the fire died down. I moved the heavy oak table to the center of the room, facing the door, a judge's bench. I went to the gun safe. The 1911 Colt was heavy in my hand. A cold slab of American steel. I ejected the magazine, checked the rounds, hollow points, designed to stop a threat without over-penetrating, and slammed it back in. Click, clack. I placed the gun on the table and covered it with a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal, hidden in plain sight. I sat in my armchair, the leather groaning under my weight. I poured a fresh glass of wine, and I waited. 4:30 p.m. The light was failing fast. the woods turning into a wall of black spikes against the gray sky. Then I heard an engine push past its red line, whining in agony up the steep dirt road. It wasn't the deep rumble of an SUV. It was a high-pitched scream of a smaller engine. I stood up and moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame. A battered sedan. David's old college Honda that he kept in the garage for sentimental reasons skidded into the clearing. Mud flew in high arcs from the spinning tires. The car hadn't even stopped rocking when the doors flew open. David and Megan stumbled out. They didn't look like the masters of the universe anymore. They looked like refugees. Megan's hair was wild, matted with rain and sweat. Her makeup was streaked, dark lines of mascara running down her face like war paint gone wrong. She was wearing a dirty beige trench coat over her silk pajamas. David was shaking so hard he could barely stand. He slipped on the wet leaves, catching himself on the hood of the car. They looked back down the road, terror etched into every line of their bodies. They ran to the porch, their footsteps heavy and frantic. Megan banged on the heavy timber door with both fists. "Walter, open up. Please, they're right behind us." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I didn't step back. I stood in the threshold, filling the frame. "You were told not to come here," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with their hysteria. "Please," Megan screamed. She fell to her knees on the muddy porch, grabbing the hem of my trousers. "I'm sorry. I'm Marie. About everything. Just let us in. They have guns." I looked down at her. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the raw animal instinct to survive. I stepped aside. "Get inside before you let the heat out." They fell into the room, scrambling on the floor like frightened animals, seeking a burrow. I closed the door and locked it. Thud. Click. "You have to give us the money," Megan sobbed, pulling herself up on the edge of the sofa. "Cash! Cash! You must have cash in the safe. Give it to us. We can pay them off." "Hello, Megan," I said, walking back to my chair. "I thought I was an old fool. Why would an old fool have cash?" "They are going to kill us," David yelled, pacing the room, his hands tearing at his hair. "Dad, listen to me. It's the Russos. It's not the bank. Megan borrowed money. Street money. We didn't tell you." "I know," I said. I took a sip of wine. The room went silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Megan froze as she looked up at me, her face pale as parchment. You know? "I know everything," I said. "I know about the 200,000. I know about the underground poker games in the meatpacking district. I know you tried to declare me incompetent with Dr. Thorne yesterday." I looked her dead in the eye. "I know you planned to lock me away so you could liquidate my estate to pay your gambling debts." Her jaw dropped. She looked like a ghost who had just seen her own grave. She couldn't speak. The shame was absolute. "We can talk about this later," she finally screamed, her voice shrill. "They are here," she pointed at the window. I looked out. Twin beams of xenon headlights cut through the darkness. A massive black SUV was tearing up the driveway, crushing the saplings I had planted last spring. It looked like a hearse moving at attack speed. "Get in the cellar," I ordered. "What?" David asked, blinking. "The trapdoor under the rug. The root cellar. Go. Now." I pointed to the heavy Persian rug in the center of the room. I kicked the rug back with my boot. Beneath it was a heavy wooden hatch with an iron ring. David pulled the ring. The door groaned open, revealing a square of absolute darkness that smelled of earth and potatoes. "Get down there and don't make a sound," I commanded. "Dad," David hesitated, looking at the gun on the table. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to preside," I said. "Get in." They scrambled down the ladder. I slammed the heavy door shut and kicked the rug back over it, smoothing the tassels with my foot. To anyone entering, the floor looked solid. I was alone in the room. I checked my watch. 6:07 p.m. Frank was cutting it close. I sat in my armchair, facing the door. I took the remote control for the exterior security lights from my pocket and held it in my left hand, concealing it against the armrest. My right hand rested on the table, inches from the newspaper, just like court. Wait for the opening statement. I heard heavy boots on the porch. No knock this time. The door handle jiggled, locked. Then a violent kick, crack. The wood around the deadbolt splintered. Another kick. Crash. The door flew open, banging against the interior wall. The wind and rain swirled in, instantly chilling the room. 3 men walked in. They wore heavy wool coats and leather gloves. They brought the smell of the city exhaust and stale cigarettes into my sanctuary. The leader was a man I recognized instantly. Vinny, the butcher, Moretti. I had sentenced his cousin to 20 years in Lewisburg a decade ago. Vinny had gained weight, his face puffy and scarred, but his eyes were the same. Dead shark eyes, flat, black, soulless. Well, well, Vinny smiled, revealing teeth stained with nicotine. Judge Sterling, long time no see. He didn't shout. He spoke with the casual confidence of a man who owned the room. Vinny? I nodded, keeping my voice level. I took a sip of wine. You're violating your parole, getting this far out of the tri-state area. Vinny laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound that turned into a cough. And you're holding my money, Judge? Where's the girl? The blonde? She owes us a lot of cheddar. He looked around the cabin, his eyes scanning the corners. She's not here. I lied. My heart beat steady. Thump, thump, a metronome of focus. Don't lie to me, Judge. We tracked her phone. We know she's in the room, or close. He pulled a pistol from his coat pocket. It was a suppressed Beretta, a professional's tool. The silencer looked like a long black finger pointing at my chest. Tell us where she is, or I put a hole in your chest. And I don't care about your gavel. Out here, there's no bailiff to save you. His 2 goons stepped forward. One of them, a giant named Kruger, pulled out a serrated hunting knife. He ran his thumb along the blade. Let's just cut in, Vinny. Old guys talk fast when they bleed. Vinny stepped closer. He was 5 feet away. Last chance, Walter. Where is she? You're making a mistake, Vinny, I said softly. You think you walked into a retirement home. You think I'm just some old man in a cabin. Yeah, what did I walk into? Vinny sneered, raising the gun to eye level. The black bore of the silencer was a dark tunnel. A courtroom, I said. My thumb found the button on the remote in my left hand. Execute. Click. High-intensity LED floodlights, 10,000 lumens each, erupted from the ceiling beams where I had installed them for security. They were aimed directly at the door. The room instantly went from dim firelight to a blinding surgical white brilliance. At the same second, a siren, an industrial klaxon mounted on the roof, screamed to life. It was deafening, a sound that vibrated in the teeth. State police. Drop it. Frank's voice boomed from the hidden PA speakers I had wired into the corners. It wasn't a recording. He was on the mic, right outside. The windows behind Vinny shattered inward. Crash. 2 flashbang grenades rolled across the floor, tossed through the broken window. Bang. Flash. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a coffin. The room filled with white smoke and disorienting light. My ears rang, but I knew what to do. I closed my eyes tight and opened my mouth to equalize the pressure. Vinny staggered back, screaming, his hands flying to his eyes. I can't see. My eyes. The gun wavered. I calmly reached under the newspaper. I lifted the 1911. I didn't stand up. I didn't tremble. I aimed at Vinny's center mass. Drop it, Vinny, I said. My voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative. He hesitated, blinking tears, trying to raise his weapon blindly. SWAT officers swarmed through the door and windows like black hornets. Red laser dots danced across the smoke, finding their marks on Vinny's chest. Down! Get down! Hands! A shield slammed into Vinny, knocking him flat. Kruger was tackled against the stone fireplace, the knife skittering across the floor. The third man was face down, handcuffed before he knew what hit him. The room was chaos. Shouting, boots on wood, the acrid smell of magnesium and cordite. I sat in my chair. I hadn't moved an inch. I placed the 1911 back on the table, slide open, safety on. I took another sip of wine. When the smoke cleared, the siren cut off. Frank walked in. He was wearing a tactical vest over his suit. His face grinned. He looked at the shattered windows, the handcuffed hitmen, and then at me sitting calmly with my wine. He shook his head. You cut it close, Walter. Too close. Timing is everything in a closing argument, Frank. I said. Did you get them? We got them all, Frank said, nudging Vinny with his boot. Attempted murder of a federal judge. Extortion. Weapons charges. This puts Vinny away for life. No parole this time. I stood up. My knees popped. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a cold ache in my joints. I walked to the rug and pulled it back. I knocked on the trapdoor. Court is adjourned, I said. You can come out now. The trapdoor rose slowly. Megan and David climbed out, coughing in the lingering smoke. They were covered in dust and cobwebs. They looked around the room at the shattered glass, the police with assault rifles, the handcuffed men being dragged out. Then they looked at me. Megan's face was ashen. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered audibly. She looked at the man she had mocked, the man she had tried to institutionalize. She saw the gun on the table. She saw the SWAT commander nodding to me with respect. She realized that while she was playing checkers, I had been playing 4D chess. She finally saw me, not as an obstacle to her inheritance, but as the man who stands at the gate. The sun didn't just rise. It bled over the horizon. Deep bruising purples gave way to a cold, pale gold that illuminated the frost clinging to the pines. It was Thanksgiving morning. The silence had returned to the Catskills, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped. The police had taken the hitmen away in armored vans. The shattered glass of the window crunched under my boots as I walked the perimeter of the room. Frank had left a patrol car at the end of the dirt road, a silent sentinel. Inside the cabin, the high-intensity floodlights were off. The fire was nothing but glowing embers, casting long, wavering shadows against the stone hearth. We sat in the wreckage of the living room. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the night was evaporating, leaving behind a deep, marrow-deep exhaustion. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer physical toll of being 70 years old and holding a gun on a killer. Megan sat on a low, wooden stool, wrapped in a coarse gray wool blanket I kept for emergencies. She looked small. The Veery lifestyle brand icon was gone. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup by tears and rain, revealing pale, blotchy skin and dark circles. She wasn't the arrogant socialite who had screamed at me yesterday. She was an addict coming down from a high, facing the cold light of withdrawal. "I'm going to prison," she whispered. Her voice was raspy. She stared at the floor, at a shard of glass from the window. They heard everything on the wiretap. The gambling, the money laundering, the conspiracy to defraud the trust. She wrapped the blanket tighter, shivering. "I'm done. My life is over." I looked at her. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, sad duty. "No," I said. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Walter, you are not going to prison," I said. I sat down opposite her, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I spoke to the district attorney while you were in the patrol car, giving your statement. Because you cooperated, however unwillingly, by leading us to Vinny, and because Vinny is the prize they really wanted, they are willing to cut a deal." I paused, but it is a conditional deal, and I am the one setting the conditions. Megan's eyes darted between me and David. "What conditions?" "You are going to rehab," I said. "Not a spa in Malibu with yoga and smoothies. You are going to a secure state-run facility for pathological gambling and addiction. Upstate. It is ugly, it is strict, and it is effective." Megan recoiled. "State-run, Walter. I can't. The people there are exactly like you." I cut her off. "Addicts. 6 months." I continued. "Inpatient. No phone. No internet. No brand building. No Instagram." I leaned closer. "If you leave early, if you sneak a phone in, if you miss a single therapy session, the deal is void. The federal fraud charges will be filed immediately. You will go from the clinic to a cell for 10 years. She began to cry again, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. 6 months.
She choked out. "My business, the lodge." "There is no business, Megan." I snapped. "It was a hallucination funded by stolen money. It is dead. Take the deal," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "Or take the handcuffs. Those are your options." She looked at David.
She was looking for the enabler, the man who would write a check, make a call, smooth it over. David didn't move. He didn't reach for her hand. He nodded slowly. Go, Megan, he whispered. Please? She slumped. The fight went out of her. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. I turned my attention to David. He was sitting on the hearth, staring into the dying coals. And you, I said. David stood up. He looked at his wife, then at the floor, and finally at me. I didn't know about the loan sharks, Dad. I swear to God. I thought it was just credit card debt. I believe you, I said, but that is not a defense, David. That is the indictment. I stood up and walked over to him. You knew about the spending. You knew about the lies. You saw the water rising in the basement, and you closed the door because you didn't want to get your feet wet. I was scared, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was scared of losing her. I was scared she would think I was a failure. You almost lost your life, I said sternly. You let her drive the car off the cliff because you were too weak to take the wheel. Ignorance is not innocence, son. It's negligence. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. I am selling the house, I announced. What? David gasped. Megan's head snapped up. The glass house. The monument to vanity. It is in my name. I am listing it on Monday. But that's our home, David pleaded. It is a sinkhole, I corrected. I will sell it. The proceeds will pay off the legitimate debts, the credit cards, the bank loans. I will settle with the creditors. Where will we live? David asked, panic rising in his voice. You won't be we for a while, I said. Megan is going away for 6 months. I looked at him squarely. You will get an apartment. A small one you can afford on your salary as a junior architect. You will drive a used car. You will cook your own food. You will learn to budget. I walked over to the shattered window and looked out at the sunrise. The snow was blindingly white. You called me an old fool, I said to the reflection in the remaining shard of glass. I turned back to them. But this old fool just saved your lives. And now I am going to save your souls. The support is over, I said, my voice final. The trust is locked. I have amended the deed. You will not see a penny of the principal until you are 60 years old. Not 50, 60. David opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. You are on your own, I said. Sink or swim. If you swim, you'll be a man. If you sink, well, at least you'll know it was your own doing. The room was silent. David walked over to me. He hesitated. He looked at the father he had ignored, the man he had called obsolete. Then he hugged me. It wasn't a polite hug. He grabbed me tight, burying his face in my shoulder, shaking with sobs. He held on like he used to when he was a child, scared of the dark. Thank you, Dad, he cried into my coat. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was so lost. I patted his back. It felt frail, but beneath the fear I felt a heartbeat. I know, son, I whispered. I know. I held him for a moment, remembering the boy he was and hoping for the man he could still become. Now, stand up, I said, pulling away. Stand up straight. I looked at Megan. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at me with something new. Respect, fear, maybe a tiny fragile grain of gratitude. The officers are waiting outside, I said. They will escort you to the clinic. They walked out into the cold morning air. Megan got into the back of the patrol car. David stood by the door for a moment, looking back at the cabin. He waved. A small, sad gesture. I didn't wave back. I just nodded. The car drove away, tires crunching on the gravel, disappearing down the winding road. I stood alone in the cabin. The silence rushed back in, filling the space where the chaos had been. I was tired. My bones ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, but the air felt clean. I walked to the small kitchenette. I opened the freezer. I took out a frozen turkey I had bought months ago. It wasn't organic, it wasn't heritage breed. It wasn't catered by a Michelin star chef. It was hard as a rock and covered in frost. I put it in the oven and turned the dial to 350. It would take hours. I had nowhere to be. I sat down in my leather armchair. The Wall Street Journal was still on the table, covering the gun. I picked up my glass of wine. It had gone room temperature, but I didn't care. I watched the sun rise higher, flooding the cabin with light. The silence in the room wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. It was structural. I had lost the illusion of a happy family. I had lost the fantasy, but I had saved the reality of my son. I had stripped the rot from the foundation. I swirled the wine in the glass. I smirked, a genuine, tired smile. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the ghost of Eleanor, and to the quiet victory of the long game. Happy Thanksgiving, Walter, I whispered to myself. Consequences are the only thing that's real. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, and if you believe Walter made the right call, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps these stories find the people who need to hear them. And if you want more tales of justice, betrayal, and the hard truths of life, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.